least at the very start of it. Just a heads up, it's not really that great. Kind of had to come up with it this morning. All right. Ohayou gozaimasu. Kyo kiki kurete arigato. Watashi o namae wa Aidan desu. Watashi wa Norio no tasuke o karite kono presentation o gabate ori. Kyo wa junbi o shite imasu. Hajimemasu. So that means thank you for coming today. Good morning. My name is Aidan. I start on this presentation with the help of my peers. I am ready to present today. Let's start. So, just an introduction for those who don't know me, although I think almost all of you know me, because I didn't invite anybody specific classes here. So, this is all the information that I basically had about me. As you can see, this is all to date currently. And then you have my strengths and weaknesses on the side. All right, so now we have my committee here. As you can tell, with all of them, they're very unique images. So I don't have a whole lot to say on each member of the committee, but I'll try and say something for everybody. So for Mr. Adams, the reason I made that picture of him was because I've always wanted him to grow a very gigantic, like almost ridiculously huge afro, and he has never committed to doing that. So I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to make that realization, a dream come true. And then for Miss Stewart, I found a robot that has emotions, because in 7th grade I used to think Miss Stewart was kind of like a robot. Sorry, Miss Stewart. And last night when I didn't know if you were going to be able to make it, I was kind of trying to come up with something quick. So I was like, all right, this will work. For Gage, I was trying to do something that was Marvel related, but I couldn't really think of much. And it kind of just became that, basically. Jarvis was very on the spot this morning. I had seen something on YouTube about Shrek being on Netflix.
Oh my god,
so that's my justification. With Tessa's, I really just been thinking that I wanted to make a girl look like a guy in a picture. So I don't know how well I did, but I think it turned out okay. And then for Raquel's always told me she's always considered herself an emo, combination between emo and goth. So I know she always wears lots of black and such, so I wanted to make hers about as colorful as I could. And then Zach, who unfortunately cannot be here today, and from what I've been told by Manny, isn't here today at all. I just chose a random picture of some cashews because I didn't know the picture of Zach. All right, so for my theme, this is something that I heavily attribute to Mr. Adams after going to see a senior presentation last year, because I was thinking about it and he actually made a really smart suggestion to me. So my theme, since a lot of you know I'm actually a huge fan of Batman, the character, and I like to think I could probably be pretty knowledgeable about it. So what I actually chose to do is I chose a different variation of Batman from comics, TV shows, video games, or movies, and I applied that to each year of high school. So first we have freshman year, which I basically chose what's technically referred to as the Rebirth Batman because of the DC current running of comics called Rebirth. But you could basically just consider it the kind of generic comic book Batman. And so this one, the reason I chose it is because when it comes to when I was coming out of middle school, I had kind of, I feel like I coasted through middle school a little bit, and I came into high school not really expecting to have to change that much. So I feel like I was kind of more so the same, because even though, in the case of DC, even though they've rebooted their characters multiple times, the main character traits of them kind of stayed the same over the years, because that's sort of what defines the characters. So going into classes and clubs, I was unable to remember all my classes I took, so this isn't as accurate as it could be, but I feel like I got the base ones down. So the main ones that I highlighted were Intro to Lit and Comp and Biology. And so for Intro to Lit and Comp, I feel like this was more of a growth experience for me, because when I came in, I had it with Mr. Cohen, and I actually really enjoyed the class. But then the second semester, I don't know how many of you guys remember, but Ms. Howe came in as the teacher, and I had a hard time adjusting to that. I was not getting all my work done on time, or at all, and I would notice that Miss Houck didn't really know how to update the gradebook, so I thought like, oh, she's never going to learn how to update the gradebook. I can just pass with a grade non-existent. And then one day I woke up and I had an F, so, just to put it simply. And I managed to get it up after that, because when my transcript came in, of course I was not happy about it, and I was talking to my mom about it, and it kind of made me realize that while I had still passed the class, that wasn't really what mattered. It was important for me to actually try and go above and beyond and not just try and do the bare minimum. Because I remember what she said to me was, so what, you passed? Like, we kind of expect you to pass. Like, it was a little bit of a wake-up call, because I felt like I had kind of just relaxed my way through freshman year. And this was also one of the years when I started to develop better relationships with my teachers. Like, I started to talk to my teachers more outside of class. I think Mr. Adams was probably one of them, even though Mr. Adams and I have a much better relationship now, although it's not exactly built on friendly things, I would say. It's more so built on insults. But when I was writing this, that reminded me of a story that I had from when I was in biology with Mr. Pomponio. So one day my shoes had just completely ripped apart one day while I was walking around, and I went into Mr. Pomponio's class, and gave me all these pairs of shoes. And I remember I was kind of like, oh, that was really nice of him. And then I go home to my parents and tell them all about it, and it was at that point that I learned that Mr. Pomponio probably thought I was homeless. And so besides that, there's not a whole lot I can say. On my classes, I did have Algebra 1 with Miss Whittington. Just gonna throw that out there. Leave it as it is. And then I was still in drama club at the time, which it was definitely an interesting experience, because this was the year that we did Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the Wizard of Oz. And normally I had been used to being on the tech crew, moving stuff on stage and such for the shows, but I actually tried something different with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I chose to be on the costumes department. And while it was fun and it kind of caused me to be more artistic, it was kind of boring at times. Yeah. Although, no offense to Charlotte, she tried her best to make it fun. Alright. So, and regarding domains, I know that a lot of people have kind of applied domains to each year. I do have that as well with my other years, but when it comes to something like communicate ideas, I had a hard time applying that to a year, so I've kind of applied it broadly. Yeah. And that's why there's no domain for this year. All right, so next year is sophomore year. I chose Investigate the World for this. And for this year, I chose the Christian Bale Batman, which I don't know how many people actually know this about me, but he's one of my least favorite Batmans at this point, even though he's the one that probably got me into Batman the most. And I think the reason I attributed it to this year is because I don't know how many of you guys have seen the Dark Knight trilogy, but with his character as Bruce Wayne, he's not very good at balancing his emotional commitments, and they kind of get in the way of what he's trying to do as Batman. So I feel like this year I had stuff happen that I'm not going to go into detail, but it kind of caused me to be not at the highest I could be that year. So in terms of my classes, I had American Lit, Geometry, AP US History, and Chemistry as the main ones that I highlighted. American Lit and Geometry were both classes where I didn't start out very well in the first semester, but for the most part I gradually got better in the second semester. With American Lit, we had to do this honors project where we had to kind of basically just do something to educate our class, basically about what we wanted to learn about. And for me, I had recently learned about when comic books were actually restricted quite a bit. So I made something about the Comic Code Authority, which basically censored comic books. And I actually made, even though it was really bad, I actually made a little sort of comic book thing to illustrate it. And I thought that was really interesting because I'm a big fan of comic books, and it definitely taught me some new things. and it also taught me about how to balance my time effectively because we had to create goals for each class. So I had to kind of try and balance what stuff I was going to do on one day in order to be able to get everything done in the long run. Geometry was just overall pretty hard. I've never been very good at math. I remember the first day in middle school, I had Mr. Zielinski's math class for 6th grade, and I went after class and told him, like, hey, I repeated 4th grade math. Is that going to be a problem for me to, am I going to need help? And I was pleased to hear that I wouldn't really need help, but math is definitely not always been my strongest suit. The next class I chose was AP US History. AP US History it was definitely a challenging class for me, but I think looking back on it, it was a class where it was actually my first AP class, because I don't know if any of you noticed, but I didn't take an AP class freshman year, and that relates back to the part where I was kind of concerned that I wouldn't be able to handle it, so I just chose not to do it. But this year I chose to take AP US History, and I think looking back on it, while it wasn't always the easiest class for me, I really appreciate the teaching of Miss Boyle, and I think she definitely taught me some good skills with working hard and just being able to undertake a large class load like that class, and I think it definitely prepared me for the AP test. And then finally we have chemistry, which I don't have a whole lot to say about this, but chemistry, like, I've always been a little bit intrigued by science, but I've never been the greatest at it. And I think I was very happy because by the end of the year, like, there would always be students who didn't understand super well, and I felt like I was actually somebody who understood it really well, which, considering I only had sort of a medium level of interest in science, it felt really good to be at such a good level. Like, I also remember there were times when we would have the reviews for the tests, and I would actually probably learn most of the content for the test just by going to Mr. Brown's the lunch period before, and he would help me fill it out. And then, I'm trying to remember what show she was here. I cannot really remember. I'm just going to see what that is. I don't know why I had drama club. Oh, I do not know why I had drama club on there. I think I might have actually not been in it. But this is what happens when I stay up till 11 last night working on this. But going in to investigate the world, well, I've never, even at DCIS, I've never been much of a world traveler. I have traveled to other places, but it's not really been necessarily with DCIS. I think one of the biggest trips that I did do was the Canyonlands trip, and of course that was, with the stuff I was going through at the time, that was kind of a nice breather, because it happened during second semester when I felt like I was doing a lot better and kind of pushing myself more, and it felt nice to be able to have another good experience like that while I was still trying to do really well. And I will touch more on Investigate the World later on, but it is something where it more so applies to my passages. Alright, so for junior year, we actually have 2 different Batmans. And so all I'm going to say for the first one is that I chose the George Clooney Batman. And if anybody has seen the Batman and Robin movie, or just knows that George Clooney is attributed as one of the worst Batmans of all time, I'm hoping that should say something. So for junior year, I have the classes highlighted: Algebra 2, AP Bio, Japanese 6, and Passages. And so with Algebra 2, starting off on a high note, I had Mr. Andrew last year, which unfortunately he only taught here for 1 year, but that was probably the best experience I've had in a math class probably entirely. He was a really good teacher with just the way that he constructed the class and the way that we learned, and like, he was always supporting us and making sure that we understood it. So I just highlighted that as something where it was a really good experience for me to actually have such a good math learning experience after going through Algebra 1 geometry and having a little bit of a rocky experience. I'm going to skip AP Bio for now because I have a lot to talk about with that, and I'm just going to move on to Japanese 6. Japanese 6 was actually a class where, I know Kathleen will remember, it was kind of bunched up with Japanese 6, Japanese 5, and Japanese 4. And it was a little bit hard having a bunch of other kids in the class, but at the same time, Mr. Matsumoto would basically like everything was harder for the Japanese 6 kids, and it was a little bit harder for me to balance it, because at the same time, I forgot to mention this, but I actually started a job the summer before junior year. I worked at Papa Murphy's for about a semester, maybe, and that made it really hard for me to sort of learn to balance my responsibilities pretty much with classes and such, because I was working multiple days a week, probably until like 8 or 9 every night, and then by the time I'd get home, of course, I'd be too tired to want to do work, you know? So it wasn't the easiest thing to try and balance, and I wasn't doing a very good job at actually getting help from my parents, which led to a pretty big disaster when I ended up failing both Japanese 6 and I believe it was English 3. But with English 3, I was able to kind of get it back together the second semester. And so, although I did, however, have to take summer school for it past summer, and that was definitely a learning experience for me. And then, it was on Japanese 6. So Japanese 6 was a lot harder with just the material and such, and I was having a hard time finding time to study, or just finding time to sit down and do the homework, because I was trying to balance myself with work. In that class, it was just very challenging for me in the long run. I ended up, but then second semester, of course, I was trying to get my stuff together with it, and that was going well for the most part. Like, if I didn't do so well on the test, then I would retake it, instead of just trying to make sure that I was staying on top of my stuff. However, I wasn't working at the time, and honestly, I do kind of wish that I was working, because I feel like it would have been more of a testament to my ability to balance my responsibilities if I was still able to try and grow in school and at the same time still have to deal with work. Because although it helped me in the long run, I think it only showed that I was basically just kind of selling myself out a little bit by taking out one of the things that made it hard for me, and then just doing better than the other thing. I feel like it would have been better if I had still tried to make it work with the commitments that I had. And so, Japanese 6, one thing happened at the end of the second semester where Mr. Matsumoto was gone with an injury, and I ended up not doing nearly as well as I thought I was going to do in that class after all my hard work, because he wasn't here in time for me to be able to retake a test that was dragging my grade down. It was just a whole ordeal. And then going into passages, I had it with Mr. Vera, and it was a pretty good class. I feel like I was actually able to get a lot of my paper done in class, which kind of surprised me, because I always, when I go to passage presentations, people talk about procrastination being one of their biggest issues, and I thought that I was actually able to avoid procrastination quite well. So my first passage, my written passage, I have a passion for video games, so I actually wrote one about why video games should be considered a form of art. And while I didn't focus as internationally as I wanted to, I was still really happy with how the paper came out. I was able to talk about a lot of different things, like I had some stuff about graphics in video games. I did a whole section about the actual process of making a video game, and then I went specifically into comparing like screenshots from video games to actual pieces of art that are well known. And I thought that it was, I was just really happy with how it ended up turning out in the long run, and I was very happy with how I was able to communicate with my presentation in the end. It was probably one of the first presentations where I used a variety of mediums. Like I had pictures, of course, and then I had something that was interactive, but of course it related to the stuff I'd already been describing. And I actually had a video in it which I thought was really influential. It was one of the videos that I used to make the passage, and I thought that it was really important to have an understanding of the topic. And then for my second passage, I worked with Mr. Matsumoto and Mr. Tabano on my committee, and there was a little bit of issues with planning that because I was gone during the time when they had the committee meetings. And so for that, I wanted to do something that was more internationally focused, because my passage one was not very internationally focused. So I looked into the Fukushima disaster, and I actually, again, I made a not very good graphic novel about the effects of it, because I wanted to do something that incorporated my Japanese and I actually did make the thing in Japanese. And so I wanted to do something that incorporated my Japanese language, incorporated something internationally focused, and incorporated my liking of art, because I felt like I hadn't been doing very much with that during the time. And so the main issues I ran into that with planning it were, of course, the committee meeting had to be rescheduled quite a while later. And then the other main thing, which definitely taught me a lesson, what I had planned to do with my graphic novel is I had typed up something that was specifically about Fukushima, so if people wanted to learn more, there was a way that they could learn more. And so what I did is I found like a signpost near my house, and I hung up the graphic novel, and then I put like a QR code with it, so people could scan it as they're walking by, you know, and then they can learn more about it. Unfortunately, I did not make more than one copy of it, and I found out the day before Passages Day that it had been stolen, or it had been ripped off, or flew off with the wind. I don't know exactly what happened. So that was quite a hard thing to go to, and it definitely taught me to be more responsible about those things and to make sure that I'm always more prepared. Like, I like to think I'm pretty prepared about stuff, but it's definitely things like that that teach me that I could be more prepared with the stuff I'm doing. Finally, leading into AP Biology, this was a class where it was one of the classes that I didn't do super well. Like, I got a D the first semester, and but I think I more so appreciate because while the class definitely did prepare me for the AP exam, I think I more so appreciate just Ms. Rodriguez, the teacher for it, which unfortunately, like Mr. Andrews, she's not here this year. Although I did actually try and communicate with her to invite her to my presentation, but I was unsuccessful with that. And she was always wanting to make sure that I got everything done, and it was clear that she had very high expectations for me. And I think when I started to realize that in the second semester, that helped me have higher expectations of myself, and I think overall that definitely helped me do better with it. Just with the semester overall, like if I did something that I was happy with, even though maybe I still need to work on other stuff, she would basically be proud of me for doing it. That was part of my motivation for continuously pushing forward with it. And I remember she also would talk about some things that were more so artistic, like I believe her partner Sophie is an artist, and that kind of helped me understand some of my further interests going forward with college and having sort of an idea of things that I might be interested in doing. So I thought that was really valuable information to have. And then I was also in the Black Student Alliance during the school year, and I thought that was really beneficial for me. Although I can't remember a lot of the exact things we did, I remember we watched a documentary in it over the course of a couple lunches, and I thought it was definitely some really interesting information. Like, I feel like I learned a lot during it, and I'm happy that I was involved in the club. It definitely opened me up to a lot more things. Yeah. So that's what I got for junior year. And then just because I was able to do a lot better during that year, I chose the second Batman, which was my second favorite Batman, the Ben Affleck Batman. And finally, moving on to senior year, I chose probably my favorite Batman of all time, which is actually one from video games and TV shows and only animated movies, and that's the Kevin Conroy Batman, which I don't know how many of you guys actually know. But I feel like this is just kind of sort of like me reaching the highest I could be, basically, just reaching the best form of me during senior year. Because while I have had, of course, a couple slip-ups during senior year, I feel like for the most part, this is probably the best I've ever done in high school. And I'd like to say that I'm pretty proud of myself for how I've been doing. And so now moving on, I didn't have a whole lot of classes this year. I had AP Lang, Pre-Calc, Connections, and Newspaper labeled as the ones that I had for this year that I thought were beneficial. Not that physics wasn't beneficial, but just the ones I mainly thought about when I was reflecting on this year. I'm going to start out with Newspaper. I think Newspaper was really good for me because I liked the class. It was a small class that made it easier to kind of learn, basically, and just have a good experience. But I think one of my favorite things from it was the articles that we had to write, because we had to write these opinion articles, which I took as a chance to write reviews of things like video games or books or movies that I had seen. And I think it definitely helped me strengthen my writing. This was the same year when I finished writing a Batman screenplay that I have now finished. And I think that definitely was part of the reason why I started to get more into creative writing and such. And I also had a good experience at the end of it where for our final we had to make an actual DCIS newspaper, and I actually made the entire website for it and uploaded all the other students' articles to the website. And then moving on to connections, that's been interesting. I have gotten constant beratement from Mr. Adams about not having my portfolio done. But I think part of it has just been really interesting because it's kind of made me think, because like all the years before, since 8th grade, Mr. Adams has been more than basically just a friend to me. And I've always thought about like, what would it be like if he actually taught me a class, and how would that sort of affect the friendship? Because I feel like it's a different dynamic having somebody as your friend than having them as your teacher, because they have to be kind of different types of people when they're instructing and not when they're just having a casual conversation with somebody. And I feel like for the most part, it worked out pretty well. Like I was able to carry over my roasting Mr. Adams into connections to great effect. And I feel like I was still able to get my work done effectively. And it was nice having Mr. Adams as a friend as well, because I was able to get that kind of help with my assignments, even if it was outside of class. And I felt comfortable asking for help about it. Moving on to pre-calc, that has been something where I feel like it's helped me grow as a person to be in pre-calc, but it's also been one of my harder math experiences. It's been very hard for me to understand the content. I think Raquel and Tessa can attest to that. And but I feel like in the sense that it's helped me grow as a person, I think it's helped me kind of have higher expectations for myself. Like I remember there was this one time where I had to retake a test, and I had already retaken it, and I hadn't done as well as I wanted to, and then Mr. Ryder had kind of offered me the chance to come and retake it another day, but I realized that that was past the point when everybody else was going to be able to retake it. And although it was hard, I basically told him, like, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think it's fair for me to have an opportunity that my other classmates aren't going to have, just because I didn't do so well on a retake. So I think that while that has been some hard development for me, it has definitely strengthened me as a person. And then finally moving on to AP Lang, it's something, just like pre-calc. There's a lot of homework with it, and that can be a really big challenge for me. Although I try to balance it fairly well, even though I work 8 hours every Saturday. But I think I've definitely appreciated the class in the sense that it's just like newspaper has helped me strengthen my writing. Like we recently had to write some opinion editorials, and just like the opinion papers from newspaper, that kind of helped me get some ideas that I had out on paper without having to worry about them being for an assignment and such. And I think when it comes to things like essays and rhetorical analysis, I've definitely been able to strengthen my ideas and incorporating my writing into my ideas with that. And I have also been working this school year. I was able to get another job at King Soopers, which is conveniently right next door to the place I used to work. So I didn't go far from the tree. And I don't know if that's an actual phrase, but basically that has been really good for me. Like I think I've been working there officially probably longer than I worked at Bob Murphy's. I am almost at a point where I can actually get a promotion as soon as this summer. And I think it's definitely just helped me have a stronger self, because it's a lot higher level of responsibility than I'm used to. But it also just adds into the fact that along with me doing drama club school year, it's been a great experience. I've met a lot of new people I didn't really talk to a whole lot before, and I've made a lot of new friendships. And it's just been really beneficial for me. I really enjoyed it. I think when you incorporate that drama club with King Soopers and the increased workload of the classes that I've had, that's part of the reason why I'm proud of myself for how I've done this school year, because I feel like I've managed to successfully balance all the stuff I've had, and in doing that, I feel like I've actually been able to grow as a person through different commitments that I've had. And then, so I kind of chose recognized perspectives with this because while it's not as strong, I do have a couple examples. There was the senior service project, which I forgot to mention for connections. That was something that I did with Raquel and Kiana. And what we did is we went around to different middle school advisements and we basically had them do art to illustrate like how they felt about the school and their place in the community, because we kind of felt like they were underrepresented. And I think for me, I have some friends that are in middle school, but I think it was really beneficial for me because I got to have more experiences with the middle schoolers and kind of get to know how they feel about the school, how they feel about how they're represented, of course. And I actually really enjoyed the experience of doing it, just learning all that new information, because while I'm not talking to all the same middle schoolers before, I think it was definitely really beneficial to actually learn more about the perspectives I was just assuming for a while. And then just going into my senior seminar, this was something where it definitely caused me to kind of learn more so about what I wanted to do with my future. I brought in one of my uncle's friends via Skype, actually, who he works for the video game development company Bungie, who makes the Destiny games, if any of you guys have heard of them. And so I had him talk all about video game development, the process of making a video game and such, which kind of strengthens on my original first passage, because I talked about how video games are made. And I think that was definitely beneficial. Like, I liked learning new information. I was really happy with how the presentation turned out. Although there was just one minor flaw, and that was that my speaker couldn't actually see the audience the entire time. Yeah. But I think it definitely, just because of all the complexities of video game design that I learned about, it kind of made me shift my interest in a career. Because for quite a couple of years I wanted to have a career in writing for video games, but now, of course I still want to do writing, it's something I'm very passionate about, but that kind of shifted me into more so a career of wanting to just be a screenwriter, like for movies and films and TV and such. And so yeah, that's what I've got for that. So for this year overall, I chose recognized perspectives, and while that's not as strong and it's more so represented from my passages, the reason I chose this was because I feel like whether it was talking to Raquel and Tess and Jara, or hearing wisdom from Mr. Adams, or hearing my senior seminar and learning new things about the career I was interested in, I think I was sort of taking these different perspectives and kind of using them as a chance to grow and sort of understand what exactly I did want to do with my future and the place I was at, and kind of if I needed to change that or if it was a good spot to be in. And like, for example, with my classes, I definitely had to take help from a lot of other people, which I wasn't always used to doing. All right. So next we have my college, and I will actually be joining Manny next year at Community College of Denver. And there's a couple different reasons I'm going here. Because I applied to Metro, UCCS, and CCD, and for a while UCCS has been where I wanted to go, and it still kind of is, but I'm very happy with my choice to go to CCD. Because, first of all, it's a pretty cheap way to get all my prerequisite classes done. Second of all, they have a writing program, so I could better enhance my writing skills and kind of get a chance to see where I want to go from there. And it's also a way for me to still stay in Denver and not have to worry right now about things like housing costs and stuff like that in the more expensive parts of college. So I think it's definitely a very smart decision, despite the guy in the parking lot who called me a loser for it. But yeah, who cares about him? But those are basically the main things that I've said. And if I did continue on college after CCD, which I'm definitely hoping to do, I'm thinking that I'll probably go into UCCS and still study something video game related, because they have a very good program with video game design and development. And then, so finally I want to say thank you to all of you, because some of you I've only known for a short time, some of you I've known for a very long time, some of you I've known since I came in here in 6th grade. And reflecting on all this, it's definitely been, I couldn't have done it without all of you guys to get to this point, without all the help, without all the guidance, without all of the encouragement and the words of advice, whether they be positive or negative. So I just want to give a big thanks to everyone in this room for all that.
So now Aidan's committee.
Oh, should I play the video first, or do you want to do this first?
Usually we deliberate and give you feedback
Okay.
because you might have to do more or start over.
Oh, thanks. What's up?
Just wondering, should I stop this now or do you want me to keep going?
You could probably stop it now if you want to.
And then can I get back onto it?